So now we'll see how to implement token authentication. So token authentication is typically used in conjunction with basic authentication. So we definitely have to issue the token to make sure that the use of our API is authorized, and then we use basic authentication that we can authenticate the user of the API. So what we do, in order to do this, we use our authorization filter attribute, and that's where we do all our magic for comparing the token that they're sending us with the token that's in a database. It's actually a pretty simple procedure, as simple as just calling the repository and comparing the token that's in a database table with the token that's being passed to us. However, since this is inside of the filter attribute, getting the repository there requires us to use property injection, and that's probably the most complex part of implementing this. So I'm going to go ahead and start getting the code and showing us how to do this. So most of the magic happens right here in our counting case authorized attribute. In order to, the building is kind of upside down a little bit. We could just go ahead and I could just go ahead and build the part where it's actually doing the checking through the repository. But to look at the bigger picture, we need to kind of work in also the use of basic authentication and how that works with tokens. So the first thing that we need to do in a constructor, we need to check if we need this part of API to also authenticate the user or just to authenticate the token, So to do that, we'll create a constructor and pass a Boolean value per user. So here's the constructor, and we're passing in Boolean per user, and we're actually making it default to true. So that means that when we're using the attribute in the areas where we don't have the user, we would just pass false in a parenthesis into our constructor. The next piece of action here that we have is going to be happening in our own authorization override here. And here we need to first work in this person. So all of these things that are in our checking our basic authentication here, we want to put those inside of the check if per user. So we have this if per user or else we return. So now everything, the whole check per user is its own being done if this flag is true. So on top of it here, now we need to go ahead and check our token authentication. To make it cleaner, we're going to put a couple of constants here, API key name and token name. We're going to use these guys when we're for parsing our query string. So then we go ahead and parse our query string. To do that, we use HTTP utility parse query string, our action context request URI query. That's the way that we get a query string. And then we do the check first that the query string is correct and it exists. So we do this if not string is null or white space, and here we use our API key name and a token name. And if those two are good, we continue on down. And once we are in, we get our query string, we go ahead and assign these two variables from a query string, API key and a token. And here's where things get a little complicated. We have to call the repository to get our auth token and pass in the token. However, we are now in a filter, which is an attribute. So it's not as easy for us to get this our repository there. So what we do is we can for now go ahead and just add the repository property. However, that's not going to work. We're going to have to use the inject here to initialize this. But for now, let's just continue with the programming here, and we'll just say, now we say if so then we say right here, if this auth token that we got from the repository is not null and it equals the, and then we do the expiration and say API user that add is API key. So if it's not null, obviously that means that we found a match. Otherwise it wouldn't be null. So that's how I check that's in there. And then also we're also checking API user API ID and the expiration. Although this will build, our repository is going to be null and it's not going to work. So we're going to use a property injection using an inject. So here, first thing that we do is we use a inject attribute and we bring in an inject, and in order to do this in our service here, we have to create a new service, and we'll call it an inject web API filter provider. I'll go ahead and create that. So this guy basically will now be able to do something with URL filters through the inject. This is where we do it. It's like a service. So first thing that we need to do is we need to inherit from filter provider, and then we'll implement the get filters method. So in this get filters method is where we go through all our, we assign all our filters to the inject. Then we go through the filters here and we go ahead and inject our instances. So I don't want to go into too much detail here, but basically this is how we implement our property injection for our filters through the use of property injection. And one more thing that we need to do in order to do that is in our app start, in our inject web common file, we also need to register it here underneath our support web API. So now it should build, and in a fiddler I can go ahead and test it now. So in the fiddler now I go ahead and I go to our API nutrition foods, but I'm also passing API key and a token, and when I execute it I see that I get a 200 and I'm actually getting the data back. Just to test if I make a change here and add something to our token and I hit execute, so interesting part here is that I didn't do the little check if not authorized, and I'm getting this username and password, which is not really what we should be getting here. So I made a change here. Now if per user, then get that. So let me see what happens now. Let me build it and refresh. So really nothing here in the UI, and let's see in a fiddler. So I'm getting 401 because I changed the token. So my auth token is coming null here. I need to see if it's because it's not finding the one in the database. So the one that I have in the database looks pretty much like the one that I have. So for some odd reason, the when I was parsing this query string, it was actually removing my plus and replacing it with space. So just to quickly fix this, I replace this, and if I run it here in the fiddler, remove all, execute, we should be getting 200, which is good. And then if I change the token by adding another equal in the end, it should be unauthorized, and there it is, unauthorized. So this is working really well.